Here on our 2.5 acre market garden farm, we grow lots of different veggies, and all of them without the use of pesticides or herbicides. In this video, I'm going to show you how we do that.
Spoiler, we do nothing. The first point is don't grow things that don't grow well. There's one thing you will not see on our farm, and that is Brussels sprouts. Not because we hate Brussels sprouts, not because we couldn't sell Brussels sprouts, but because Brussels sprouts will not grow for me. In fact, we struggle with all of the brassicas. The kale here, this is a brassica. One of our biggest pests here in the Okanagan is aphids. Anything in the brassica family just gets covered in them. But if you choose your varieties wisely, you can still grow some stuff that, you would normally have pest issues with, and they just do better with those pests. So here is a perfect example. This is an entire bed of red Russian kale. You have not seen us feature this at all. We have not sold any of this because this kale gets disgustingly covered in aphids. It dies, it is sad. This kale we cannot grow. We can only grow these early spring, late fall. But that doesn't mean we don't sell summer kale. Here on the farm, we have a whole bed of kale that we pick off of all through the heat of the summer. These specific kales are varieties that have hybrid vigor. They do not get attacked by aphids. They are healthy. They can deal with the heat. Because we grow this dark boar and red boar, we can still have kale in the summer. We just can't have all types of kale in the summer. So if you watch your varieties and go for the most pest resistant and disease resistant varieties, it can make a huge difference. Let me show you another example. This is my Basil Patch. Last year, we really struggled with basil. We grew the classic pesto variety, Genovese, and it got black mildew. It was very unhealthy. It fizzled out by the time the heat of the summer came, and we just didn't have basil to sell all summer like we would have liked. So this winter, when I was buying my new seeds, I specifically looked for mildew-resistant varieties of basil that still had flavors similar to the classic Genovese, and I got this variety here, and now I'm thriving. I have lots of basil. It's gone through all the heat, no problems. I've been able to grow this. There's other ways you can deal with disease. A lot of the times the mildew is caused from lack of airflow. I could have spaced out my plants. I could have had way less plants. But my priority is making sure that I grow a lot in a small space. This farm, it needs to pay for itself. So for me, having lots of plants in here that are disease resistant, huge value. Welcome to our tomato greenhouse. You know what you're not gonna find in here? Heirloom tomatoes. I don't care how trendy they are on the internet. Last year, I grew 40 varieties of heirloom tomatoes. And you know what? Non-stop disease issues. Kelowna's like the easiest place to grow tomatoes. I've never had disease issues ever. So you know what I'm not growing this year? Tomato plants that had disease issues. There is thousands of options out there. You want something that tastes low acid, extra sweet, yellow, and disease resistant, and drought resistant. It exists. Whatever you need for your specific garden, put in some work. You can find a seed that's going to work well. There's no reason to struggle all season long to have a sad, sick plant that produces you one tomato when you can buy a really great variety that is gonna produce no problems. It's so much easier. So to reiterate my point, when you buy your seeds, consider the specific disease and pest issues that you struggle with. There's a good chance there's a variety out there that you can grow that's gonna make it so you don't have to worry about those things. There's no reason to spray when you can just grow a variety that makes it so you don't have to spray. We apply the rule of don't grow what doesn't grow well to everything. Our farm is actually designed based on that concept. Our flower farm here, it's all drought tolerant flowers. It's my #1 rule. I don't grow anything that isn't drought tolerant because we're hot and we're dry. I absolutely love shade plants, but this place has no shade. This is the only shady spot on the entire property. So I just have to pretend they do not exist. These are not an option. The only things that exist when I go to buy seeds are drought tolerant flowers. Point 2, having some crop damage really doesn't matter. My zucchinis are absolutely covered in powdery mildew. Despite starting to get a lot of powdery mildew damage, my zucchinis, they're still producing lots. If I open up this plant, there's lots of healthy leaves still in there. It's producing fruit, it's still flowering. This powdery mildew will eventually kill my plants off, but it's gonna kill them off at the point at which I don't really need them anymore. So why would I spend any time and money trying to fight this when it doesn't really affect me? My Swiss chard has a bunch of caterpillars that are eating out the leaves. Let's get this out so you can see. You can very clearly see that there's some holes in here. It's causing some damage. This doesn't matter. Like, I can share. This in no way is gonna affect the flavor of your Swiss chard. You know, my customers, you know, this one's looking a little ratty, but this leaf right here, a few holes. No one is going to question if this is something that I can sell because my customers know that we do not use pesticides. It's what they want, so they don't mind a tiny bit of damage. And if you have tons of damage, if your leaves are looking like Swiss cheese, but it's just for you, it doesn't matter. The aesthetics of the food in no way affect the flavor and the healthiness of the food. So you really don't need to worry too much about having to share a little bit with the bugs. As we said earlier, one of our biggest pests is aphids, and kale can, you know, really get attacked by them. Even this kale, despite being resistant to aphids, can still get some aphids on it. But what we do is if there's 3 aphids on a leaf, we spray it off, it comes off. It's completely fine. It's something that we can still salvage. These Shasta daisies here are disgusting. I don't even actually want to be crouched down with them right now. They're so gross. They are covered in aphids. Non-salvageable amount of covered in aphids. But yet again, it really doesn't matter. We only harvest Shasta daisy flowers early summer, late spring, and any damage that these aphids are doing aren't actually affecting the fact that this is a perennial plant. The cold weather is gonna come, it's gonna kill all these bugs, this plant is gonna be fine and happy, it's gonna come back strong and early next year, and yet again the cycle can continue of us being able to harvest before we have pest issues. We also struggle with our zinnias. They get the black mildew, same as the basil. We do try to grow varieties that are more resistant to it, but it still happens. We don't worry when that starts to happen. The flowers, they still keep going, and if it gets so bad it kills off the plants, we have hundreds. We have 600 zinnia plants. We can lose a few, especially at the end of the season, to a little bit of disease. I've started to get some aphids here in the edge of my Cosmo patch. There are ways that I could deal with this that, you know, still don't use a pesticide. You know, I could come in here and I could pick out all of these plants, get these aphids out of my garden, put them into the garbage can, get them away from my property, but I'm gonna leave them. And the reason why I'm going to do nothing is, number 1, I'm lazy. And number 2 is, unless you have pests, you can't have beneficial insects. Ladybugs love aphids. If there's no aphids for the ladybugs to eat, they're not gonna wanna live in my house. It's only when I have, you know, an outbreak of aphids that I start to see a million baby ladybugs everywhere. So as long as the pests aren't overwhelming and taking over any specific thing, having a little bit here and there actually helps to create a balanced ecosystem where you can get all those little insect helpers to come in and do the work for you. Point number 3 is sometimes things don't work, and that's okay. Right now I'm standing in my corn patch. You haven't seen this featured because it is very sad, and my plan for this right now is I'm gonna hack them and I'm gonna dry them. I'm gonna sell them as fall decor, but I was trying to grow myself cobs of corn here. This corn didn't work out. It's a bummer. I would have liked corn, but it's okay. You don't have to have, knock it out of the ballpark success with absolutely everything you grow. This here is the only radishes that you are gonna see this year on our farm. Doesn't mean I didn't plant radishes. In fact, I've planted radishes 3 or 4 times this year. We have a root maggot that gets into our radishes and damages them. Maggoty radishes are not salvageable. There's nothing you can do about maggot-filled root crops. So we just didn't grow them. And it's fine that we had whole patches of the farm that had to go to the chickens this year. Here we have turnips. We have a whole section of turnips. And yet again, these are the only turnips that you're gonna see featured at all this year because we had the exact same issue. The turnips got eaten up by the maggots and we were not able to sell them. And I'm pretty okay with not eating maggoty turnips myself. So now we got a whole section of turnips that we can get to the chickens. We do not want to eat that. We also really struggled with an onion maggot this year. My plan was I had a couple beds planted that I was gonna have as bulb onions. They ended up getting so gross, there was no salvaging the bulb. We salvaged the onions by early harvesting off the greens and selling them as green onions. There was nothing we could do to save the onions after they were filled with maggots, but we were still able to get a harvest by selling the greens.
If we as farmers who rely on income from selling food can sacrifice an entire bed to the chickens or to the bugs because we refuse to use pesticides, then anyone who is a home gardener has no excuse to use pesticides. It's a very important message. Like, we don't need to be spraying poison on our food so that you can get, 2 or 3 cucumbers or zucchinis or whatever it is. The amount of food that comes out of our home gardens does not warrant using pesticides. Do not use pesticides. There's no excuse for it. Herbicides too. Get out there and put a little bit of elbow grease and pull out your weeds. One of the reasons we started this channel is to provide a positive example of what you can do without the use of pesticides. And so, here we are trying to spread our message that you don't need to use pesticides. Please avoid it at all costs and encourage others in your community to grow without pesticides as well. One of the reasons that I got interested in this subject is I used to work at a hardware store, and every year we'd get skids and skids filled with just bags of poison to put on your grass to kill grubs. And it just blew my mind how much of this poison that we just put out there just so you could have a nice green grass. Like, we all need to change our expectations and our perceptions of what, a nice looking lawn is or what a perfect vegetable is, and realize that insects are going to do their thing, and we have to allow them to do their thing because they are the bottom of the food pyramid. And all of the birds that we like to look at, they all eat insects, and all the things that eat birds, like our cats, they rely on a steady supply of insects to feed the birds, to feed the cats. So there's no reason to use pesticides. We don't actually support cats eating birds. That was a joke.
Bonus content. So I've just told you that my farm is filled to the brim with bugs and all my plants are disease ridden. So how do we have such a nice looking farmer's market display? How do we do that? And the answer is, farmers are basically glorified dishwashers, and all the magic happens after things have been picked. Some of our summer lettuce stayed really small and it actually had some bugs inside of it. But when we chop it up and wash it up, it makes beautiful salad mix. So there's still magic to salvage even sad lettuce. In our beet patch, we have some yellowing and dead leaves. Here, it doesn't look its absolute best. But when we sell the beets, what we do is we strip off all of these sad looking greens, and then when we bunch them up, they instantly look a million times better. Sad, diseased foliage on the zinnias, also not a problem, because when you sell them without the foliage, so no one even sees those issues. One or two stray aphids on summer kale, not a problem. And our lettuce, earwigs love, or here, perfect example. Little caterpillars love to be inside of our lettuce. We have earwigs that live in there. There could be slugs. All we do is we submerge it in the water. A lot of those bugs, like this caterpillar, float right off. We can get rid of them. As long as we keep these heads under the water for a few minutes, almost all the bugs are gonna crawl right out, and then we will have bug-free lettuce for everyone. As promised, earwig removal using the water technique.
Another technique is, say you have a big cabbage that you harvest and the outside of it is all bug holes, just keep peeling it back until you get something that looks perfect, right? Everything that we sell has to look perfect. So even if that means that it's gonna be smaller, that's what we gotta do. So just peel back those outer layers, process it, and then in the end, you still have this perfect cabbage.
Having a garden or a farm filled with pests and disease is 100% normal.
One thing to understand about insects and disease, nature is going to come and take things when you leave energy available, right? So there's no place in nature where, 100 zucchini plants are all gonna grow next to each other. There's no such thing as, grow a natural system like that. You just have to expect that pests are gonna come to the garden because there's lots of food energy for things to consume. So don't be surprised when pests come, anticipate it.
And anticipating it doesn't have to mean you pull out those pesticides, you pull out the antifungal sprays. You don't actually have to do anything to still get a big, happy, beautiful, abundant harvest. We go down to the market, we have beautiful veggies, our display looks amazing, but as we've showed you again and again in this video, our farm is filled with pests, it's filled with disease, it's totally natural, it's nothing wrong, and it's a great system. So I hope the next time you go out and you see that you have an infestation of slugs in your lettuce, you'll stop, take a deep breath, and say, it's okay, I don't have to do anything.